Welcome to my podcast, Today's Dream, Tomorrow's Reality. My name is Vicki Poole, and I'm a master transformational coach and hypnotist, specializing in habit change. And this podcast is sponsored by the Enlightened Peach. And this podcast is all about embracing our mosaic life. And some of you may ask, what is a mosaic life? Well, it's recognizing that all the pieces of our life, the good, the bad, the indifferent, have all come together to make us who we are. Change any one thing and we are different. With that in mind, I invite you to embrace your perceived imperfections and celebrate who you are. This podcast is unedited and raw, just like life. And I am your host. And today I have a special guest that I will be introducing in just a moment. But I would love for you to leave a comment and to remember to like, subscribe, and share. So now let's get started. So this wonderful lady right here is Tehilla. Did I say it correctly? Tehilla
Perfect.
Luttig.
I'll give you the Afrikaans, which most people struggle with. It's Luttig. So it's like a sound, which is very hard to say. So Luttig is fine.
All right, wonderful. Well, I want to let everybody know that one of the things that I do, because I love people's stories and I love sharing them on this podcast. So when I'm in Facebook groups and different places, if I see someone that shares an amazing story or has this amazing, I don't know, life or energy that's coming from them, I reach out. And so I reached out to Tehilla and asked her to be a guest on my podcast, and she has graciously agreed to be here. And I will let her just kind of introduce herself because I don't think I would do her justice with all the things that she does. So we'll start there. How about that?
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. And I am a mom of two. My kids are a year apart. I'm a wife, but I'm also a couples counselor turned coach. I love working with relationships. So for me, I started as a play therapist and I was helping children, but I quickly realized when I helped the parents that the children didn't need to come back. And so I've shifted over the last 10, 11 years, more specifically into couples work. And in that transition, I also realized how much of our relationships are determined by our childhood relationships, as well as the relationship we have with ourselves. And so I'm constantly evolving.
Ah, wonderful. And there's probably not a person alive that doesn't need some kind of help with counseling when it comes to relationships, because we come with so much baggage that it is like, and everybody's baggage, hell, it could take up the whole airport, the luggage compartment stuff. So,
For sure.
so we all do, I know, and it's getting to the place where we recognize that we need help with it. But I want to take you back when you were a child. Was there stuff going on in the home where you were having a problem with communication there? Did you see people having communication problems? What was going on that might have led you to kind of feel like this was your calling?
Home life was pretty decent. I don't think that any of us grew up with the emotional resilience that children today stand a chance to, because our parents didn't know the importance of, being allowed to express our emotions and things like that. So with that said, though, there's not a specific incident. I had no idea what I wanted to do after school. So for me, it was I was doing a business degree. I started with some bachelor, a BA degree, and then I saw communication was one of the subjects, and then I went into communication and then psychology, and that opened my mind so massively to seeing that, there's reasons for behaviors and there's reasons behind these behaviors. And then that sort of just led me through this rabbit hole. And I've always loved working with children. So that ended up being in the play therapy, and then from the play therapy, like I said, working with the parents. So I can't specifically think of an incident. My father had a church and he was a pastor, so he'd speak to like large organizations and large groups of people, and it was always something. I think I got quite shy, so to stand on a stage, it was unbelievable unbelievable for me that somebody could stand in front of all these people and talk, and never mind just talk a little bit, to be able to speak for hours. But I think that's all that comes to mind when I think of communication in childhood specifically.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was talking to someone yesterday and we were talking about communication and how we get into this place of not being able to communicate. Because, for me, I had, my parents were great. But we like that baggage, they come in with baggage too. And so sometimes I saw that communication was great, sometimes it wasn't. And I got so fascinated, and I didn't realize I was thinking about communication, but what my fascination was why do we do what we do? And so I would read books all the time about the brain or our actions. And one of my favorite ones from years ago was Wherever You Go, There You Are. I think that's kind of the name of it, and that's something I used to tell my children too. You can't um, be miserable in this space that you are and move across town or to another state and then everything's all rosy, because the one common denominator is you're going to be there too. And until you can get to a place where you can love yourself and communicate in your own self, then you're carrying your baggage with you. And one of the things that I wanted to share real quick, if you don't mind, I go in my Facebook group. I have a free Facebook group that's private. It's called Make Lasting Change. And I've been going in there every day and giving a journal prompt and an affirmation for the day. And so today's was just fitting. And I create like 35 at a time. And then I have them in this list and then I'll randomly pick them out. So I wasn't even thinking about it. And this morning is so fitting for you being here, because the affirmation for the morning, I wrote it down once all of a sudden I thought, oh, I need to tell her. This morning's affirmation was, I am deserving of love and happiness. And the journal prompt that went with it was, write about a time when you truly felt loved and happy. And what can you do to bring more of that into your life? And as I started, prepping for our conversation today, it was like, oh, that's perfect, because that's what she does. She helps people to communicate in their love relationships and the self-love and so much. So I would love it if you could kind of share, how did you said you were working with children and you realized that by working with the parents that the children didn't need to come back. So what is it that you do for the parents that make that happen? I don't know, I don't know if that's the right question, but that's what I want to know.
Well, firstly, the affirmation and the journal prompts I think are so beautiful. I did a free masterclass last week on communication, and one of the journal prompts in there was also, think about a time in your marriage when you two were really happy, and what were you doing and what can you do to create more of that? So it's so aligned to that. As for my journey, for me, while I was doing it, I didn't have the words for it. But what I realized was, when I was helping the children, when I went from helping the children to helping the parents, what our children often do is they bring up mirrors to our unhealed parts of self. They bring up the parts of us that was too loud or too noisy or too bossy or too dramatic or too naughty. And so when we see those behaviors in the children, they activate that kid within us. And so by helping the parents reintegrate those inner child wounds and to be able to have conversations and heal those parts of themselves, they parent from a state of authentic being. It's not a reflection of their own hurts from childhood, so they can
That's
really show
beautiful.
up.
That's beautiful. I love that. Um, so so does that mean that you have sessions with the parents together and you're working on their relationship too, or you're working on just them healing those inner child wounds so that they parent better?
they all come and see me regarding the relationship. It's always been to work on their relationship, but my system has changed over the years. So what first I tried to do was give them all the tools to help them to communicate better. I've trained Gottman level 1 and 2. I've done, all this, well, for me, the top names in the field. I've done training by Esther Perel, Terence Real, Diane Poole-Heller. Like, there's just so many people that I absolutely admire in the field. So I've done the training and I'd give them the tools and things, but what I realized over and over again was how this trigger that kept coming up from childhood. So whether you felt safe with love, whether you felt lovable, whether you trusted love, whether you felt you could depend on people, all those patterns would come through. So they come to me for their marriage, but I help them with all their relationships by healing that first primary idea of relationships and that their sense of trust and lovability.
Yeah. Well, it's like, in Shrek, when he says that we're like onions, we all have layers. I refer to that quite often because, you help them with this one thing, and then it reveals this other thing that it's like, oh, that we need to work on that now. And then you help them with that, and then it reveals another thing, because usually what the main issue is definitely not on the surface at all. And so people come to us, I don't work with relationships. I work with weight loss and body image. And so it's amazing how people come to me for weight loss, and then we end up working with so many other things. And then weight loss becomes a result of what we've worked on, instead of we work on the weight and then the other stuff happens. It's the opposite. And so I'm assuming that it's the same with you as well, right?
Completely. Totally. I think weight loss is a fascinating journey on its own.
Yeah.
And I do think that most diets get it wrong because they treat the symptom and not the cause. So I love that you understand those layers. And yes, with the couples, I find that the one part is tools, but the other part is healing their inner wounds, and then the other part is just so there's the tools and then the wounds, but there's also the courage that it takes to be out there and to be loved, and to start using that same courage and compassion for themselves as what they do with other people.
Yeah. Well, I'll admit I've been married twice. And my first husband was a lot older than me. So whatever he said, I just thought was golden, and, he knew it all and everything. And to be honest, when going through that, I didn't stand up for myself at all, because I thought he was all knowing, because he was so much older than me. And when that went, I was divorced for about 7 years, and then I got remarried. But the interesting thing, which I'm sure you know this, other people probably don't, but all the horrible things, the bad things I learned in that first marriage, I took into my second one, because I didn't want to speak up, because and he wasn't a lot older than me, but for somehow I had already grabbed this habit of what they say is better than what I say. And I learned that if I speak up, we have a big argument. Everybody feels bad. But then when the argument's over, I'm still in the same place I was. Nothing was resolved, but now I just feel like shit. So I learned very quickly with that the best thing to do was to keep my mouth shut, because I would pick and choose my battles, but some of them were battles that I really should have stood up for. But I didn't want to deal with the consequences of the upheaval, the upset that it seemed to create. And so I'm not in a relationship now, because it's like I'm still working on my stuff, because I don't want to get in another relationship and take that piece of baggage with me. And I will admit, my second husband, I loved him dearly. And after we got divorced, we took some time away from each other, but we had children, and we were probably divorced for at least a year or more. And somehow we started seeing each other again romantically. And I find when I've talked to other people that that happens a lot. And we were dieting. We were dating in secret so that, you know, nobody knew, but I didn't realize till later that, you know, a lot of people still knew. But what ended up happening was he passed away, and he was wanting to get remarried. And I kept saying no because we're still the same people. I said, we're great at dating, not so much at being married. So we got to figure this out because I can't do it to the kids a second time. So then once he passed, it was like, I felt that if I saw anybody, I was cheating on it. And you can tell it gets me emotional just talking about it. But, and it's like every relationship I've gotten in since then, sometimes they're great for a while. And I don't know what my issue is, if it's that I feel like I'm cheating on him, or if it's I'm just not ready, it's not the right person. But some of them will last for a while, and then it's a repetitive thing that happens. I get where I disengage or they disengage. It's one of the two, you know. So I wasn't planning on sharing any of this, but there you are. So when you are working with someone that has this kind of pattern going on, what kind of communication do you help them with? Or and I know I've got a lot of childhood wounds that I work with, and I even have a picture. It's a pretty big a photograph of myself when I was about 5, hanging in my bedroom, and I talk to her quite often, and you know, and have discussions, you know, about what I'm doing, and um, just to kind of talk through it, you know. So what kind of advice would you give someone like me who is having this kind of stuff going on? How's that for a big dollop of a question?
How comfortable would you be with me? You know, what I typically would do is go into your body and just have a conversation with that part of you that's feeling too tearful at the moment. So I mean, we could go straight in and, you know, give it a go. But I know this is a podcast, so I don't want to
Hey,
put you on the
I'm an
spot.
open book, you know, so yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So there was a part of you that was very tearful right now when you were talking about your ex-husband that passed, and just want you to notice where in your body that you're noticing those feelings. You know, they could be in your heart or your eyes, anywhere in your body. Just notice where those emotions were stirring when you were talking.
Well, I kind of feel it in my eyes and my head.
Mm-hmm. And if you had to climb in there and see yourself in there, the little girl that's in there, how old do you think she is? If you had to climb into that area by your eyes, if you feel comfortable with it. If you don't, then don't do it. But if you felt comfortable climbing in there, you can imagine you've got a spotlight or a torch or a candle just to make some light there, and you'd see that little girl. How old is she?
4.
And what is she needing right now?
A hug, and for somebody to say everything's going to be okay.
Would you do that for her? Something that comes up for me, and I use my intuition a lot, so don't use it if it doesn't align, but I kind of feel like she needs to know it's not her fault.
That feels aligned.
So you can help her to put it down. You can a proverbial box that she can, or a backpack or something, and just allow her, help her to put that down. Okay, this isn't yours. It's okay. It wasn't your fault. don't have to go very deep because we're just exploring, understanding how I would do this in a session, but just allowing that part of you that was hurting Nana to be held and give her a big hug. If you can, tell her you love her. If you don't feel comfortable, that's also fine. Take a couple of deep breaths, slowly, gently, just to recenter yourself. We could take that a lot deeper, but I don't want to do that right now. I don't feel that it's the right place or the right time, but I just wanted to show you a way that you could also connect with yourself. And it's a typical way that I would take my clients through. So they'd see me for couple session in the beginning, and then we would split into individual work, and we would work with a lot of these inner wounds.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. And the interesting thing was, as I was telling her I loved her and everything, she grew to be 12. She wasn't 4
Beautiful.
anymore. So I don't know what that means, but I just knew she was 12.
And that could be various things. It could be, her letting go. It could also be that there's memories associated with that specific grief feeling. So there could be something at 4 and then something at 12. There's different moments we could explore. But I just felt for today, for the context of it, to not go too deep. But I love that she immediately wanted to speak and she could tell you what she needs.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I don't do that. I do a similar process where I'll put people in an imaginary train where they kind of go back in life, and when certain things, hit them, then that's where we stop the train and we work on the what's going on for them then. And
Beautiful.
that seems to work most of the time. There are some people that are very resistant to that. So when you're working with your clients, do you ever have a client that sits there and almost gets to where they refuse to participate in some way? Does that ever happen?
It does happen. It's not, what I love about this process is how quickly our body wants to talk. Our body really holds on to the trauma and to the memories. And so when we go into it, it's 95% of the time, I would say the people are surprised with what comes up and how much comes out. And they're like, well, I don't normally do imagination, or I'm not very creative, or I don't really think like this. And I can't believe these things that just came out. So it's really beautiful to see. There are, because you've been doing the healing work and because of the openness you have to share, I felt comfortable to do it with you online. I think it's a very delicate process, and the people that are resistant, I would have a conversation with the resistance, because that resistance has been put in charge for a really long time, and it's exhausted, but it's still trying to protect you. It's not trying to hurt you. It's not trying to do you in. So to take it from that angle of realizing that those resistances are protective skills. There's something that you adapted to try and protect you, because being vulnerable was not only maybe not liked, but it was probably shamed or ridiculed or not allowed growing up. So there's a lot of work that needs to make it safe first.
Yeah. Well, I would say for people that are over a certain age, that's definitely what's going on, because when I was growing up, the main thing that most people said was children are to be seen and not heard, and so you were not encouraged to speak up, and if you got too emotional, you were asked to leave the room, and that kind of stuff. And so I only there's no telling what my parents had dealt with, because of, the way they dealt with what we went through. It was what they learned, and I'm sure they adopted and added things that they wish they had had as a child, because I think that's what I know for me, that's what I do, is like anything that I felt like was off kilter, or that I wished I had had this part, that I made sure that I had that, with my children for the most part, but I still brought that other stuff with me. So it was almost kind of
Yeah.
like you fluctuate back and forth. And I know I saw something on your Facebook about, like, you mentioned the workshop, and you were talking a lot about, or what I saw, and you know what it is, what we need, we pay attention to, right? And
Yeah.
so what I saw was a lot of things about how to effectively argue. And so that to me is intriguing because, a lot of times we look at as argument is, especially if you're like me from the things that I've gone through, it's
Mhm.
like an argument is a bad thing. And, and so you do everything you can to keep peace. And so you don't have the argument because it doesn't seem to fix anything anyway. So I was really drawn to those posts that you did about being able to argue with your spouse and communicate in a way that things get resolved. So can you kind
Mm.
of talk about that? Because that's very intriguing. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I would hope I'm not the only one.
Definitely not. I think that 99% of all the clients that see me, they start with saying it's a communication issue. And like you mentioned, the layers earlier, what represents as a communication issue is so often deeper, and it's a trust issue, it's a safety issue. And for me, there's two things that popped up while you were talking. The one part that I felt to bring up is that I don't feel that women, men were told especially about feelings. Don't, it's girly, it's, don't be such a girl, don't be such a baby. Emotions generally, I picture like a teenager, not doing well in his exam. If he had a burst out crying, he'd be teased. But if a girl burst out crying, she'd most likely be comforted and told it's okay, and she'll be better next time. So that sort of stereotype around emotions. But I do feel that women aren't really taught that anger is safe. They're taught that anger is, you're a bitch if you're angry. So confrontation, argument, anything that looks like that can be really scary, because I believe that anger is our alarm system. It's something that tells us something's off. It could be that the sensor is too finely tuned on your alarm system. If you're exhausted and you haven't had much sleep, you'll be hypersensitive to different sounds and different things. But generally, when we're starting to get angry, it's telling us, I don't feel safe. My boundaries being stepped over, or I don't feel taken care of, or I don't feel considered, but because we're so scared of anger, we let it bubble over, and we stuff it in and stuff it in and stuff it in until eventually erupts, and then we become aggressive. And aggressive and anger is not the same thing. Aggression is where we're not safe with our anger anymore. And in a fight, typically there's a lot of aggression. It's raw emotions. Your kid has taken over. Terry Real often says, it's time to take your kid's grubby fingers off the steering wheel and take back the car, take back the driver's seat and the ownership. And when we're arguing, so often it's our inner kid that's trying to make our points. And that's why it doesn't make sense. And that's why it's all over the show. And for me, for women to really start feeling safe with being angry, it's like being allowed to feel safer again, because anger is your alarm system. I live in South Africa, so most of the houses have alarms here. It's generally pretty safe. I feel very safe, but we do have an alarm, and if you don't have your alarm on, you feel more vulnerable. And for women, we don't have that alarm on. We typically feel more vulnerable, and now with that on top of it, I think we're hyper vigilant to signs and possible, my husband frowned, he must be angry with me, and we can sometimes exaggerate a response. Not, this is by no means, and the last thing I want is, because a lot of men say that women it's exaggerated because they're so emotional, but what happens is they don't trust themselves, because now, did I go over the top, or was I being too sensitive, or was I this? And so a lot of my communication work comes back to first building the trust in themselves and getting that trust back with being able to be angry and to be allowed to be. And then the arguments itself, there's ways that we bring it up. There's a lot of do's and don'ts of how we communicate, practical tools, but I find those foundations help so much, because once we've got that, if we feel safe within ourselves, we feel like we trust ourselves, it's a lot easier to implement those tools. And a lot of these tools are feel more natural. I won't say common sense, because I think it's so subjective to how you grew up, what's logical and not. But overall, there's a lot more empathy and compassion and teamwork when we're having a discussion than there is when we're triggered.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know you're married. So when you first got married, were you good at communicating?
I'm still learning.
So that mean
It's
no?
no. I think that we have an advantage over the couples that I can relate to, which is regarding friends or clients, because I'm a lot more aware and I can take a lot more breaks, but I don't think it's anywhere close to perfect. But I also tell my clients, my goal isn't to make them never argue again. It's about arguing better, about not going as bad as it normally does, and then being able to make repairs. The repairs are so important.
Right. Well, I can say that if you're not arguing about something, somebody's getting run over because, especially my first marriage, we didn't argue because
Yeah.
I didn't speak up. So there was nothing to argue about. And if most of the time, if there was anything I said, it could become an argument. But for the most part, we didn't argue because I just, there I was. Um, and then when I had my second marriage, when we would argue, it was like I wanted it to be this conversation, but it always ended up being a shouting match. And so I didn't quite know how to do anything with that either. So I would start, shoving it down and not speaking up. And I think that's when we really started, having this divide because neither one of us were able to communicate in a way that could foster this good relationship. And so that's why we did so good dating because you don't have the day-to-day things that you discuss and creates arguments, primarily money, right?
Mhm.
So it's fascinating to me, and I really would like to be in a place as I'm learning more about myself and adjusting things to be able to communicate better so that I can have those clear cut boundaries and stay with that. And these are things that I work with my clients with, but usually when we're working with people with stuff, it's because we have the same shit. We just may be a little bit further along than they are. And so I would love it if you could kind of share how, when you and your husband were first together, how you recognized. I know you were working on this kind of stuff already, so you had a little bit of a head start on the rest of us. But how did you actually decide this is something that I need to work on? We're going to do this together, and then I'll be able to help other people with that.
Awesome. Just to backtrack just a moment, I'm going
Okay.
to answer that question now. But one of the things I was thinking about was how in your first marriage you just kept quiet, you wouldn't say anything. And in the second marriage, you tried to share. And for me, what I was thinking about when you were talking was just how there's a part of you that knows the power of your voice. And it's like sort of learning that volume button, like how soft, how loud, and being okay with playing with it, being allowed to, okay, this is too soft, this is too loud, this is just right. In this scenario, this is okay. And I love the fact that you've got a podcast because it's a place where you are allowed to say, this is my power, this is my authority, this is my loud, this is my authentic, and getting positive feedback saying it was good enough, it's beautiful, it's raw, and it's unfiltered, and that's enough, that's perfect, it doesn't need to be more. I really think that's such a beautiful journey of finding your own voice.
Thank you. That's the reason I started my podcast was
Oh.
because I felt like I had filtered my voice in one way or another my whole life. And when I started seeing podcasts and different things, I thought, well, that's what I'll do. And that way I can, if people don't want to listen, they can just turn it off. They don't have to listen, right? And then when I
Mm.
started recognizing that people were spending so much time with editing this and doing all these different things, that held me back for a long time. And then I thought, if I'm wanting to have my authentic voice, why do I want to edit it? So I just said, okay, I'm not going to edit it at all. And I will say I've had a few people that I've talked to that wanted to be on the podcast until they heard that I don't edit anything, and then they backed out.
Wow.
Not that many, I mean, because I've got quite a few episodes on, but to me, it feels amazing. And I don't let, and I'm not chastising anybody that does this stuff, at all. I just know what's best for me, because I've hidden my authentic self for a very, very long time. And so I even won't use the filter things that are available on the different technology things, because I figure if I'm not going to filter my voice, why do I want to filter my appearance? And I know I'm getting off the subject tremendously, but the thing that breaks my heart is people that are doing these tutorials on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, doing all this recreation of them through makeup to where they do not even resemble who they are. And I think the most disheartening thing a person could ever do, in my opinion, is to have this face that they've made up and they go out into the world like that. And then they come home and they take that face off, and then they don't even recognize who they are. And that breaks my heart. So, but that's totally a different thing. But I just wanted to add that.
No, I think we can go for hours and hours and talk about some of the things that I think that's putting society in danger with regarding to our hyper sense of independence and a superficial way of how we think we need to be. And I think our teenagers and our kids have a very, very tough road of being authentic despite all the filters ahead of them. Because if we're struggling without growing up with that, how much more them, where they see everything. I was thinking the other day, even the beach these days needs to have a filter, that's not blue enough, that's not white enough.
That's true.
So everything has layers. But back to your question on my husband and I, one of the things that stood out for me, I did a training of Brene Brown's years ago, Brene Brown, and she said in there, choose discomfort over resentment. And that really struck a chord with me, because I am a recovering work in progress, people pleaser, conflict avoider. And in that process, it was,
I knew there was a reason we connected.
I think there's very few women who aren't.
Yes.
But so that choosing discomfort over resentment really, when I met my husband, and I just felt like he's such a special person, and it took me a while, really honestly, of doing what I thought was right, keeping quiet, nodding, like, yes, that's perfect, let's do that. I didn't recognize the people pleaser at work there. And then when my anger started welling up because something happened or he said something and I tried to suppress it, and I realized, hang on, if I want this to work long term, I've got to practice what I preach. And one of the big things, I did a Facebook post, and it's quite a while back, a few years ago, I think, where there's a picture of a lady that's leaning backwards like that, and like those gymnasts that go all the way with their hands behind their heads, onto the floor. And I just did, like, if you're leaning over backwards for other people, they can't see who you are. And it's just about how, if I want our relationship to work, I've got to be in that relationship too.
Right.
And so that choosing discomfort over resentment was a big part of it, because every time, you were saying just now about keeping quiet and not saying anything, every time we do that, many, many, many of the marriages I see are people suffocating from resentment. There's women that are drowning in resentment from things that either they've said, but the other person didn't think was important, because of the way they said it, or the timing of what they said, or because they didn't grow up with the same logics and one thinks it's logic, or because they kept quiet about it. But that resentment, we think, will cause change, but it only hurts ourselves.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I will say one of my favorite books that I recommend quite a lot is, and I can't remember the author's name, but it's called Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And
Oh, wow.
it's
Sounds
all about
amazing.
how we suppress all these emotions and everything, and then that's when all these other things start happening because we've suppressed all these emotions, and they have to
Mm.
come out at some point. And so it can come out as something totally unrelated to what was actually the issue. And another author that I love is Michael Singer. Are you familiar with him? The Untethered Soul?
Mm-mm. Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah. Because in the Untethered Soul, he talks a lot about how we we have these feelings about a certain thing, and then we hold on to it and hold on to it, and then years down the road, something triggers that
Mhm.
feeling, and we don't even know why we're pissed off and angry at our family that's in the car, you know? And so it's those two books were really instrumental in helping me to see how when we don't deal with it, this is can happen. It let me see it, but it didn't
Mhm.
necessarily help me to deal with it. Do you know what I mean? And so, as I became I'm a health coach, a life coach, a master transformational coach. And one of the things that did help me was as I was going to school for these different things, we work with
Mhm.
other coaches and they're, working with us and doing all of our things that we're supposed to be doing with our clients. And there was so many times that I would get on this session with one of these other students, and to say I was crying is an understatement because I would get that snot running down your face, crying and everything because it was like things I had buried so deep that I didn't even realize they were there anymore. And it
Mm.
helped me to get some of that stuff out. And when you talk about the discomfort, holy shit, that was some uncomfortable stuff. And if I hadn't been invested financially so much, I might have said,
Mm.
this is too hard. But thank God
Yeah.
I didn't. And I'm still a tremendous work in progress, as all people are. But the mountains that I've overcome to just be able to be here today is astronomical. And so I know I still have some more mountains to climb, and I'm good with that. But it's fascinating. You work with people to do this communication, this relationship thing. And so it's mind boggling. How do you help all these people and still stay centered in yourself and not just get all that angst and energy entering into you? You know what I'm saying? Because
Mhm.
all this
Mhm.
is energy. And I can even feel sometimes when I work with a client that has a really strong energy and a hard time, I can feel it afterwards. I'm either very elated or I can be very down, and I have to ground myself and do different things. So, what do you do to help not bring all of that stuff that you're helping people with into your being?
I learned the hard way. I had severe burnout, compassion fatigue, and all of the rest. But adrenal fatigue was for sure a problem because I wasn't. It was between juggling little kids and work and trying to run the household and all sorts of things going on. But what I literally sometimes there's some clients that I will go like this and I could just feel
Yeah,
myself like I just need to get this energy off of mine. It's not because they're bad or anything like that. It's just it's heavy. It's not mine. I don't
right.
want it. I've got a walk group. I go swimming right through winter and summer. I've got a close group of friends that we go swimming with once a week. I have boxing twice a week. I love it. It's also a way to just let it out. And there's shifts that I take. And for me, I think a big part of it is when I hear, from the parents, like the feedback and how happy the kids are and how their confidence has grown and how things have just shifted in the family that really that makes it all worth it.
Yeah, I mean, that just kind of makes you warms your heart, right? Right?
For
Because I know
sure.
I love when my client reaches out to me and says, "You're just not going to believe the difference that I have right now." And, and it's just, people that reach out on Facebook too, and they'll say, "I love what you're sharing, and you made my day." And it's like, oh, this feels good. It's worth it. But I will say, when I first started doing this work, I knew people in person, you could had energy, but it was when I started working on with people online, I was blown away with the amount of energy that that grabs a hold of you, in that way too. So yeah, I have to do the release, and then I have to take off my shoes and ground on the floor or go out in nature just to kind of decompress. And the funny thing was, I looked at, when it was, when they were having angst and a hard time, that was the energy I needed to remove, right? Well, then it came to realization that when it's an elated thing and you leave, I get really hyped up and energized. And some of mine I do later in the day. And when I do that, I couldn't even sleep because I'd be so excited and everything. I didn't realize that that was their energy too, and that it was better for me to have my energy. And so I learned through this process to release the energies. And I think one of the things that I want all the listeners and everything to take away from this part right here is that everybody has energy. And that's why when you walk into a crowded room full of people and you don't know a soul there, you know exactly what table to go to or who to speak to, because you can feel their energy. And you also know which areas you don't want to go over there and talk to them. It just doesn't feel comfortable. And so if you can feel the energies like that, and then our energy reaches out around us, what is it how far is it they say? Because it's our personal space. And, so there's this energy everywhere. And so you can actually be taking on other people's energy, whether it's good or bad. So it's always a great thing to be someone who meditates and grounds by putting your bare feet on the floor or on the grass outside, well, weather permitting, hug a tree or do different things that, like you do, the swimming and the boxing and everything that creates it where you only have your energy and not somebody else's. So to me, that's really an important distinguishing thing to me that I didn't know for a very long time, that you can do that in person and electronically. Is that
It's
something you find
amazing.
as well?
Most certainly. I work mostly online,
Okay.
and so I've definitely felt that. I have there's a lady that does Reiki here in our town, and she's got clients overseas, and I never thought you could do Reiki online, but apparently you could.
Yeah.
And you can, and I get it because I do these things. When you were talking now about the room, walking into the room, I just felt that might be important for your listeners. Like,
Okay.
something I see a lot is people mistake safety and for familiarity. So you can meet somebody and you feel this connection and you think, okay, this must be love, or this must be trust, and it's actually a familiarity that there is from childhood. So when we heal our childhood wounds, when we do this sort of work, we get to trust our judgment of people as well. I've had so many people that say to me, why do I always attract this sort of person? Or why do I always land up with this sort of person? One of the most extremes that I saw was, for example, a client that said that he just found out his wife had an eating disorder, and after they've been married for many years, and his mom had one, but he felt so ashamed he'd never told anybody about it. So nobody knew that his mom had one, and Harry married somebody with the same. So it's these patterns that we don't recognize, and unless we address them, they keep showing up. We keep going back into these relationships, and that's why I know we've gone back a lot of times, like you ask in communication. I can give skills and I can give loads of tools. I've got tons. But if we don't recognize the patterns, we're going to keep filtering through our expectations based on our first relationships that we had.
Yeah, yeah, perfectly said. Thank you for adding that in. it's like one of the things that is important to me to recognize a lot of times for me is that, our outer environment, our experience is all a reflection of what's going on in here. And we can
Mm.
blame so and so so bad. But it's a mirror, a way for us to see what we need to work on. And
Yeah.
so I've over the years I've gotten where I look at it as a game of, that really ticked me off when they said or did that. Now, how is
Mm.
that a reflection of me? Whether it may not be how I'm acting, but maybe that's how I'm treating me, you know?
Yeah.
And so, um, if I look at it as a game of exploration, it doesn't hurt so
Mm.
bad, and I don't look at it as the blame game for what they're doing. And I do have some people in my life that trigger me, whoa, big time. And I'm always, it's like, whoa, they said that. What is it about what they said? What is that causing in me, and how can I take care of it? And sometimes I
Mm.
can figure it out, and sometimes it takes a while. So,
For sure. And I mean, I have my own therapist. I recently found a new one after a while of not because mine ended. But I do believe we all need a therapist. I don't think, I think we'd all be better off, not necessarily just a therapist or a coach, but somebody that can help you to see the patterns, because when you're in it, it's really hard to see.
yeah,
With regards to the example just now, I realized I didn't finish my thought, not because you interrupted, but because my thought jumped around. So when you're walking into that room, you mentioned that example of, you'll know which table to go to and which one to avoid. Our familiarity from childhood often has an impact on that. We might feel safer with this crowd than that crowd, and we will. So that energy is completely spot on. We feel attraction or safety or recognition there, so we'll go there. But if you find that you're typically drawn to the same wrong crowd and you can't understand why you're always in that sort of situation, then it's about this inner pattern that there's a familiarity there that needs to be healed.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Definitely, definitely. All right, so we are close to being at the end of our time. This has been amazing. I have enjoyed so much our conversation, and you sharing some of your personal life with us and helping me with mine. Uh, but thank you so much for being here. Is there any last words of wisdom that you would like to impart everybody with, and then tell them how they can reach you? Because I will be putting a description in the comments, or I will be putting a description, and then in there I will put the links to how to get in touch with you. But if you would share it so that anybody that's listening and not actually looking would be able to know right
Perfect.
away.
Wonderful. Thank you. I can't believe it went so quickly. It was lovely. Parting words, I think that once we have a pattern of arguing, Esther Perel says it takes two people to create a pattern, but only one needs to step out to break it. And so when we having these arguments and these patterns, to be able to realize that we're on the same team. So before you have your conversation, it's coming up and it's going to go sideways. This topic always goes there. Your job is to de-escalate yourself, to get yourself calm, not to find the best techniques and the best tools and how to persuade them, but to realize we're on the same team. And if he's as strongly against this as I'm for it, what are his reasons? Not our assumptions of it. So to be able to take it that completely step into, okay, they have to be feeling strongly about this for a reason. So I've just find that setting your intention before the conversation is like putting on your GPS before you go into a rough territory. You want to know where you're going, and typically we want to have this conversation because it's important, or they did wrong, or we have to prove to them, and that's going to get us lost even further. But if
Yeah,
it is to understanding, if it is to how do we figure this out together, you're going to get out on the other side together.
definitely. And that goes with conversations with our children and everything too, that's yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and how do they reach out to you?
My website is The Couples Connection. So it's www.thecouplesconnection.com, and they'll be able to find all the information there.
All right, perfectly said. So thank you so much for sharing and for being here with me today. And I want to remind everyone to do me a solid. And when you are watching this, you go ahead and whatever platform you're using, make sure you subscribe, like, and share, because I want to be able to ensure that people like you get on here and I'm able to get your ideas and your thoughts out into the world at a much bigger rate. So thank you again, everybody, and I will see you soon.